Central London, and I wonder what do you do to protect yourself? Like, I take ascorbic acid and glutathione. I don't know if I'm overdoing anything, but also for air quality indoor, air quality, what kind of specifications should we think about for air purifiers?
Can I start outdoors then? Hopefully you don't own a vehicle if you live in central London and you use good public transport, so you're not contributing to pollution. 2. Which is, again, another question. Don't breathe while you're on the tube. So yeah, it's really important for those of us that understand the issue to not contribute to the problem. That's the first thing. And then to use all our wits to try and ensure that the people in place who can make the policy changes which will benefit us in the ways which we know can make those changes. And we've been very lucky, a number of us here, being able to influence the GLA and data in that respect. Moving indoors, as Stephen said, this is a new area of understanding, but there's some pretty clear issues. The first one is gas cooking is a combustion, open fire. As you can see, it produces a lot of NO2, a lot of particles. We really need to move away from having gas in our homes. Induction hobs are much better. So we're talking to councils with their refurb plans in social housing to make sure that that's no issue that they move forward. And then the second one we find is, unfortunately, again, primarily in social housing, is around the damp and mould issue. It is really terrible. And I believe this is the case across most of the UK. And here, there is a large body of work to be done around education. I think a lot of people now, we're not teaching people how to live properly that our parents and grandparents did. So when you have a shower in the morning, humidity will increase in the bathroom. If you have a window in that bathroom, you should open it for 30 minutes afterwards, just to clear that humidity. If you have to dry your clothes inside the home because you can't do it outside the home, then again, the same sort of thing. So we need basic education, and then we need, obviously, we just need people to understand that, there are challenges even inside our homes, inside our castles.
Thanks. Another question? Yeah.
Hi, thanks for your talks. In regards to epigenetic aging, there was a recent study, maybe about a year and a half ago, that pregnancy causes rapid acceleration of epigenetic aging across tissues in mice. It's also demonstrated in humans. And then there's a reversal after delivery. So that, to me, brings into question how reliable are these markers. I know the Horvath plot is only looking at about 300 CPG sites. There are also other studies that are looking at 9 million CPG sites across the entire genome, but really those are also very correlational. There isn't really, a direct link, in my view, as to how accurate they are. What are the functional relevance of the data that you present?
So I would flick it around a little bit. We're not doing anything transgenerational here. So we can park the transgenerational signal and exactly how epigenetic signatures get transferred, because it's still a bit of a question mark, apart from the fact that they do to a certain extent and people can't really understand it. In terms of these studies, your question really comes down to how dynamic and stable are the changes in the methylome, really. Now, what can we do in a study where we have some blood lymphocytes which are collected from an individual at a particular point in time? The only way we can address your question is to maybe look at a long-term exposure estimate and compare it against a short-term exposure estimate, which was one of the slides I removed to make sure that my talk would be 15 minutes long. So if you go to shorter-term estimates, these effects disappear. They are only seen with the longer term. Now, it's not absolutely nailing your question down, because you would need to follow these patterns longitudinally with an individual over time to get precise data. But it does say that they are more sensitive to longer-term cumulative exposures than they are to shorter-term exposures. So that's useful. Your final question is what does it really mean? Well, for me, at the present moment in time, I think there's a danger of over-interpreting methylation changes as being functional. What I think they provide for you, this is my bias, is a good internal biomarker of exposure. I think The lead methylome signature is a very good example where you can now use the methylation signature for lead instead of actually measuring long-term accumulation of lead because it's very tight. So I think what we're looking at here is a biomarker of long-term exposure, but that long-term biomarker of exposure is related to all of the markers which have been trained within those particular clocks, and that's why I get irritated about the clock argument. Showing accelerated aging means nothing unless you then go back and analyse how the clock was trained. So that's why I'm interested in the PM2.5 and PM10, because the clocks which have the effect are the clocks which are focused on mitotic turnover. And that kind of makes sense to me in terms of sort of remodelling and the number of times you go to, the number of times you go to the well to mount an inflammatory condition. For me, that makes sense.
So could I go home today and order one of those clocks off the internet? And would I be able to do anything with that information?
So again, absolutely you could go home today and you would find somebody who would take a sample and measure your methylation status,
right,
probably using one of the first generation clocks,
right,
and would provide you with an estimate of your biological age. And if they were really unreputable, they might tell you something about your disease risk. And they shouldn't be doing it, and it's not meaningful at this point in time.
So do you think if we're, say, going to one day incorporate something like polygenic risk scores or something like that into methylation clocks, you'll have the best of both worlds?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of, so for example, we have full genotyping in
right.
Airway, so we're kind of doing
exactly
the
that.
other benefit of, say, a study like Airway is that clearly this falls within that exposomic pattern. We're not just breathing air pollution, we have diet, we live stressful lives. I can superimpose a marker of social stress and deprivation on those effects and look at the composite life signature. And then that becomes more interesting, because then theoretically, if you do that, you could potentially get to a position where you could talk about the fractional contribution of different aspects of your lifestyle and environmental exposure and diet towards the aging profile that you feel. And that would, I think, be useful, sort of not real science, kind of metaphorical, but it might guide people towards healthier lives, which I think is ultimately what we're aiming.
Got it. James, you had a question at the front.
Has there been any research into the area of effect of green belts just in terms of diluting air quality and changing? So even in London city central, sort of just around Hyde Park, how far does that extend and how beneficial are green belts?
So London has got the ultra low emission zone, and so introduced the stage 1, which is just central London, Cheshire, Charleston Street, and then stage 2 was out to the north and south circular, and the final stage of 21 was out to the outer boroughs. And each of those incremental stages, when they've been in place for 12 to 18 months, there is demonstrable benefits in air quality. And that is linked back to the change in the emissions from the traffic fleets, which we have very good information on. So it's there. The traffic fleet is changing because of the policy. The emissions are going down, air quality is improving. What we're doing at the moment is looking for the health signal, the benefit from all that. And I think we'll have good news soon.
Got it. Other questions? Sorry, Young? Yeah.
You talked a bit about the Mediterranean diet and the protective nature of it relative to smoking as well as air pollution. Have there been studies linking that more directly to changes in the gut microbiome and then back around again? Sorry.
So I possibly, but I haven't looked at it myself. I'd imagine, I mean, frankly, maybe
I don't know.
I drifted away from diet when we became interested in air pollution, and there has been an unholy separation of dietary science from air pollution and environmental science. And this was my attempt at bringing them back together. And then, at this point, I'm now interested in this question, yes, because I think it's fantastically interesting.
There's quite a nice literature accumulating of what air pollution does, both to the gut, skin, and the respiratory microbiome. And it's all in the wrong direction. And it's the direction when they're looking at non-communicable diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, all those sort of conditions. The microbiome is moving in that direction. What hasn't happened yet is the metabolic link or the immune link between what happens in the lung or in the skin or in the gut and the emergence of these diseases. But it's likely to go back to these early life exposures where the air pollution in early childhood starts to set the trajectory for the future development of the child. But those data are not yet in. And there's a new MRC unit being set up, core grant being set up in Manchester. And I was going to assume but I wanted to talk to Manchester since I'm a Mancunian myself. Anyway, never mind. The point is that question you've asked is now going to be actually looked at. An important thing about the question, and I think it's true of all of what we said, air pollution doesn't act on its own. We have virus infections, we have allergen exposure, we have all these other things going on. So the exposome, the breathed environment, the exposome is the key here. And looking at how these things interact through the microbial colonization and the metabolites, and then the programming of different organs. So there's a lot of exciting stuff I think going to emerge out of it.
Okay. Other questions? Just to the side.
You presented overwhelming evidence of the impact of pollution, just human systems and death and so on. Now, when we were dealing with smoking, there was a ban on smoking and there was a treat on smoking. What are the big picture sort of policy responses to this? And particularly, could you comment on something on the economics of it? We still have an economic paradigm that's driven by creating particulate matter.
Maybe I could
so
start.
So
I'll start with the economic argument, which
not just the argument.
Sorry, the economic
policy movement.
The analysis in our report, we did some quite detailed work on this, and it worked out about £27 billion each year is what we're losing as a result of the consequence of air pollution. If we start bringing in some of these new diseases, which are being reckoned like dementia, then we suddenly start getting into big numbers. 50 billion was the estimate that we worked out in our report. Now the problem is with policy, of course, is that many of the policies that are going to be needed are going to be unpopular by definition. They are. So you take electric vehicles, for example, which some people have said is going to be part of the solution. Well, as soon as you start increasing that fleet, and we're I know, encouraging that strongly in this country, but anyway, it's starting, then you start to have the pollutants coming out of the heavier vehicles on the tyres, on the brakes. So at the same time, you're going to need to look at the tyre construction and the way brakes actually work, and look at the whole system if you're going to try and improve individuals' human transport systems. If you're going to look at housing, for example, then just look at this country's housing, for goodness sake. You can go into any part of the world and see housing as bad. Well, I know there is housing is bad, of course, but I mean, we are in Victorian housing still, which is absolutely disgraceful. And of course, there's a lot of resistance for people wanting to change all of that, and it's very difficult to understand why. Because if it's causing the sort of terrible health issues that we are seeing in the news every day almost now, what are the drivers? Well, of course, money. People are making profits out of all of this. And it's the kind of counter-argument, really. You've got this great feeling in Britain that we have to make money out of these different issues, rather than actually solve the problem. But only if we could be big enough as a country to solve the problem, which will take 8 to 10 years to really make progress on. And maybe, Mr. Starmer might think about that if he wanted to defend his position at the present time. It might actually help the British people understand that government isn't just a passing whim, but something that's going to make a difference to everyday life.
Just to support that and what Stephen said about health professionals communicating to their patients and also acting as advocates for change, I think it's really important. We're not really trained to do that, but it is a sort of an open door. I think we launched Doctors Against Diesel to support the extension of the ultraviolet emissions. And I must say we didn't get a lot of pushback, and I wasn't vilified in social media, although I didn't read it, so it all came to be. Yeah, it all came to frame. So I think that discussion is really important to raise awareness, and one thing we can do that, and that is a sort of a where we could make a difference.
Question at the front? Oh, got time for a couple more questions. The pre-lunch slot for questions is never amazing.
If you are talking about air pollution, my question is about water pollution and plastic. So generally it's for all of us, because data are so contradictory. You take water from plastic bottle, this is person. Okay, you switch to bottles from the glass. The same glass bottles even more plastic. So, okay, let us take tap water, but you will have hormonal exposure. So what do we do?
I'm going to answer this question by saying that I think 98% of everything everybody has heard about microplastics is factually inaccurate. And I will then say, if you had a litre of bottled water, irregardless of the manufacturer, you might have somewhere between 50 and 500 particles of plastic in that litre of water. If you were standing by the centre of Marylebone Road, you would be breathing something in the order of 27 to 35,000 particles per cubic centimetre. So the scaling is gone. Now that doesn't mean that they're not important, because they're clearly persistent and they could bioaccumulate in the body. But I do quite a lot of public advocacy around air pollution, and increasingly I'm going to meetings and people are saying air pollution is microplastics, because it's all they hear in the media, and it's resulted in a distortion of the reality. They're there as a minority constituent. There are so many other chemicals within those environments that we need to focus on as well. And what we actually need to do is to have a sensible, framed, scientific discourse on microplastics, so the science is right, as opposed to what's going on at the present moment in time, which is really, I think, almost like the wild west.
I mean, you may have missed a sigh when you said that. I think a lot of people, including myself, were surprised. I mean, I've seen, you know, there's papers in the New England Journal of Medicine, as you know, on carotid accumulation and so on of microplastics, every single organ in the body and so on. Could you just explain to the audience, because I think people were quite interested in that, and I really respect your view, why you say that 98% of everything you read is nonsense? Is it just because it's exaggerated, or?
Because it's really difficult to measure.
Cause and effect?
No, it's actually very difficult to measure the actual thing.
Right.
So, for example, if we were to take, you're recording this and I may be sued, so I can take some care. If you went to the New England Journal of Medicine, it's an incredibly important paper because it's in the New England Journal.
Right.
And it shows that there's particle accumulation in atmospheric plants, and importantly, says that that's related to outcome. It's the only evidence that the accumulation has an outcome. If you believe that what they've measured is a microplastic.
I see.
But unfortunately, the method they've used probably isn't specific, and there's a big argument that what they've actually measured and attributed as a microplastic are foamy macrophages.
Wow.
And if what they have measured are foamy macrophages, it's not a surprise that the number of foamy macrophages in an atmospheric plant. So there is uncertainty in the field.
That's really helpful.
And that kind of results in a kind of distortion. And I've got a feeling that we're going to have to reframe and reinterpret.
That's really interesting. I think we've got time for one more. So would you like to?
Well, I was going to bring it back to the aging perspective, but starting at the very beginning of life. So you were talking about the impact of particulates on the fetus in utero. And I did see preeclampsia as one of the problems there, but we know that preeclampsia then has long-term consequences for the mother. So cardiovascular health is much poorer further down the line. So are pollutants actually driving preeclampsia, and is that prematurely aging the mothers as well as the babies?
We have, as part of the Clean Air Programme, of which I'm a champion, there's a program called Respire, which has been operating out of Swansea and Edinburgh in particular, but also other Imperial are involved in several other universities. And they're looking at maternal health from air pollution and the fetus. And the early evidence, we have a meeting on the 17th of this month to discuss this up in Cardiff, as it turns out, I'm told, close to Swansea, that there are some really important effects on the pregnant woman which go beyond the non-pregnant woman. And we had this discussion a little bit earlier on about what happens in pregnancy, things like the epigenetic side gets turned on and off. But I can tell you, the data that they've got now, because it's not been studied before properly, is that air pollution in pregnant women is the same as everybody else. It's not. So we're going to learn about that. None of it's published yet, so I think we're going to see some exciting stuff come out of that.
I think on that note, we call for lunch. Thank you very much.